The story of Snow White is said to be based on the life of Countess Margaret von Waldeck of Bavaria, whose life played out in a very similar manner to Snow White's. Margaret is often depicted as a fair-skinned, raven-haired girl similar to that of Snow White. Margaret lived in Waldeck and her family owned mines. This is how mining will come into play later into this presentation. Margaret lost her mother at a young age, and her father remarried Katharina von Hatzfeld. It's believed that Margaret did not enjoy her company and left for Brussels. Once there, she fell in love with Philip II. Margaret's stepmother, Katharina, was unfortunately not very happy with her relationship decisions. She did not think that it was going to be a good political move for them. Margaret unfortunately died at the age of 21, and the letters that they found that she wrote indicated she suffered from tremors, which is an after effect of poisoning. Although many people wanted to place the blame of her death on her stepmother had already passed away. Although the poisoned apple does not directly relate to the story of Margaret, it was a historically known story from her hometown that a man gave children poisoned apples when he believed that they had been stealing them from him. Wildungen was an area where children were forced to work in mines that Margaret's family owned, and they ended up experiencing stunning growth, defects, and death by the age of 20. Hence the dwarves in our favorite fairy tale.
The first version of Snow White, as it's known today, appeared in print through the efforts of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. They were known as the Grimm brothers, remembered today through their work as scholars and collectors of folklore. In 1812, the brothers published a fairy tale story that had been told to them by two sisters, Jeanette and Emile Hasenflug, who lived in the town of Castles. This was the basic story of Snow White. In the original version, Snow White is not actually named Snow White, but is in fact her name is Snowdrop, and her villain is not her evil stepmother, but it is in fact her mother. One of the main differences that this story has is the fact that the queen dies from red-hot iron shoes where she is forced to dance herself to death. In the later edition, they actually changed Snowdrop to what we know today as Snow White. In the second edition of the Grimm Brothers' Snow White, we do see her name change from Snowdrop to Snow White, and her villain is now her evil stepmother. We also see a change in the way that she dies. The way she dies is actually softened to where she eats the poison apple. These changes were apparently made in an effort to make the narrative more suitable for children, making it more of a fairy tale. This original story also introduces the magical mirror, the 7 dwarfs, and the glass coffin. These story devices were also kept in the later versions, such as Walt Disney's classic and the animated film Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. They were revisions in the plot, its main change being names given to the dwarves themselves. Although it was the Grimm brothers who first brought Snow White to what we know, similar tales have also existed in other countries at various times, which I will explain. Another version of Snow White comes from Scotland. It is called Gold Tree and Silver Tree. This tale from the Scottish Highlands was undoubtedly influenced by Snow White. In it, the mother, Silver Tree, asks a talking fish who is the fairest of all. When she is told that it is her daughter, Goldtree, she is ordered to be taken out and killed. She later discovers that her daughter is not dead but has married a handsome prince. She finds her and poisons her. The prince places Goldtree not in a glass coffin, but in a locked room. He remarries, and his second wife, discovering Goldtree's body, revives her. Unusual ending whereby Goldtree, the prince, and his second wife all live happily ever after. In the version of Maria and the Wicked Stepmother and the Seven Robbers, another version of Snow White, this tale actually comes from Italy but appeared in print in Germany in 1870. This story details an evil stepmother who orders her husband to take his daughter, which is Maria, and abandon her in the woods. It is there that the young girl wanders into a home which is owned by 7 robbers, instead of 7 dwarfs, who take her under their protective wing. When the stepmother learns that Maria is still alive, she arranges for her to be given a poisonous ring, instead of a poisonous apple. The grieving robbers place Maria into a coffin and take her into a nearby city. It is there that the young king discovers the casket and is able to revive her.
The story begins with a queen who wanted a child as white as snow, red as blood, and black as ebony. She gave birth to a daughter, Snow White, and then died. The king's new wife had a magic mirror in which she looked upon daily and asked who was the fairest of all, and it always responded in her favor. When Snow White turned 7, the magic mirror said that she was the fairest of all, which made the queen so jealous that she hired a hunter to kill her and bring back her heart. The hunter couldn't kill the princess, so he let her go and brought the queen a boar's heart. Snow White wandered through the forest until she came to an empty cottage that belonged to 7 dwarfs who said that if she house kept, she could stay there. They also warned her not to let anyone in because it may be the queen. After learning of the hunter's betrayal, the queen disguised herself as a peddler woman. Snow White let the old woman in to buy pretty laces, but the queen laced her so tightly that she fell down dead. The dwarfs came home and cut the laces, and Snow White came back to life. The queen then disguised herself as another old woman and sold her a poisonous comb, which worked until the dwarfs removed the comb and saved Snow White's life again. Then the queen disguised herself as a country woman selling apples. The woman ate half of the apple to assure Snow White it was safe, but only the half given to her was poisoned. She fell down dead, and the dwarfs couldn't save her. The dwarfs didn't want to bury her, so they made a glass and golden coffin and put it on the mountain. Birds came to weep for Snow White with the dwarfs. A king's son happened upon Snow White and wanted to take her with him. The prince's servants were carrying the coffin on their shoulders and tripped over a tree stump. Their stumble knocked the poison apple loose, and Snow White came back to life. At the feast for the marriage of Snow White and the prince, the evil queen was forced to dance in fire-hot shoes of iron until she died. This film starts with the king already remarried and Snow White as a servant. One day, Snow White is wishing for love in a well, and a prince appears. The queen has seen the encounter and becomes furious. The magic mirror said the girl with lips as red as a rose, hair as black as ebony, and skin as white as snow was the fairest of them all. Forest animals led Snow White to the dwarf's cottage after the huntsman let her live. The queen disguised herself as an old peddler woman. The birds try to stop the queen, and although she was warned not to, Snow White lets the woman in. The peddler told her she had a wishing apple, which made Snow White think of the prince. She ate the apple and fell under the spell that was to close her eyes forever, only to be revived by love's first kiss. The animals alerted the dwarfs, and they were able to chase the queen up a mountain, where she ultimately fell to her death. The dwarfs made a coffin of glass and gold. The prince arrived, kissed Snow White, lifting the spell and giving her life. Snow White and the prince were married and lived happily ever after. In this movie, the queen wanted a daughter of red, white, and black. She died while Snow White was a child. The king was tricked into battle with a mysterious army, where he found a beautiful woman who he then married. The woman, Ravenna, married the king, killed him, and took the kingdom as her own with her phantom army. Snow White was imprisoned in a tower. Ravenna has the ability to look youthful by sucking the life out of young beauties with her magic. The magic mirror tells Ravenna she will become immortal if she gets Snow White's heart. Birds help Snow White escape the castle, and the huntsman stays with her on her journey. They encounter the dwarfs, who agree to help fight against the evil queen. Ravenna disguises herself as a childhood friend of Snow White and tricks her into eating the apple. The huntsman's kiss brings Snow White back to life. The friends march into battle against the evil queen. Snow White kills her stepmother by stabbing her in the heart.
Visual analysis of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Snow White and the Huntsman. Disney's 1937 version of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was the first ever animated film of its kind. This concept that Walt decided to use Technicolor, combined with the distinct use of light sound and soft music, helped to depict a feeling of joyfulness, happiness, and bliss to its audiences in such a way that we almost become oblivious to the actual story being told. In Snow White and the Huntsman in 2012, this live-action film was very dull in color and uses sharp sounds and edgy music to convey darkness in this entire film. By doing so, the audience is made aware from the very start that this is going to be a very gritty tale and more along the lines of the original Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Visually, the biggest difference in the two films is most definitely color. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is very rich and vibrant in its color, using rich blues, bright yellows, reds, and greens. It gave off this visual appeal of happiness and sheer joy to its audience. The opposite goes for Snow White and the Huntsman, which was a very dark film visually throughout. This film was full of dark browns, grays, blacks, earth tones, and its visual appeal conveyed a lot of sadness, depression, and fear, and even anxiety to its audience. Line space and human body in both films. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, use a lot of soft, contoured, almost blurred lines. And equipped with tight images, they were very close to the screen and everything fit into the frame. Almost like Walt wanted to bunch everything and make it fit so there was not much space visually. So that our eyes were focused on the screen, what was happening, and that we didn't miss a single thing. The characters had more rounded figures. The dwarfs had fuller faces. Snow White had more form-fitting clothes so that you can see her voluptuous body. And she was visually, obviously, more dainty. And she cared more about her makeup and the way she was dressed to please the prince in the end. In Snow White and the Huntsman, there were a lot of edgy, sharp, distorted lines that made this bold, in-your-face, almost like attacking the audience's visually, and it was really nice to see with the wide open shots, the big castles, the big monsters, the tall horsemen compared to the small Snow White. It made it seem as if Snow was in this lost area, and you really got that feeling that she was alone and that the kingdom was this big world that she was trying to consume. The characters in this film were mostly thin and really muscular in their size. Snow was very thin yet fit, and she didn't care too much about her appearance, if at all. Even when they put her in the scene where she was, being dressed in the royal crown, she was kind of like, it was like that subtle pretty. Her garment was torn, and her dress was torn and dirty later on in the movie when she was fighting with the huntsman, and it even got to a point where she wore men's armor. Visually, this Snow White cared more about defeating the evil queen than what she actually looked like and what clothes she was wearing. And because of that, her strength shined more so than what her beauty did. And I think that was a big point that Rupert Sanders, the director, wanted to show in the 2012 version of the film. As far as context goes, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs created in a time where, in the early 1900s, children were the main audiences of these Disney animated films. All the fairy tales were being adapted by Disney at this time, and it just so happened Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was just the first of very many. Because this was a target audience for children, there were a lot of hidden messages in the film. Because, like I said, the goal was to entertain the audience with this newfound, imagination and this newfound animation. And Walt didn't want to get too specific with the gory details of a lot of the grim tales in the story. The huntsman was even eliminated from the film, and I think that's because Walt knew that putting his character in this lively animated film would have possibly ruined not only the imagery and the flow of the animation, but also the reception from probably the parents of these children that were watching this film. In Snow White and the Huntsman, it's more modern. In today's world, fairy tales are known to be more realistic and direct in their subject matter because there are so many frilly and nice and sort of laid back versions of these fairy tales being told that we kind of forget that many of these fairy tales didn't have happy endings in the beginning. Yes, there were happy things about them, but fairy tales back when they were first created in the written word were very gory and very, direct in their subject matter. And I think this version was the closest that we were going to get to it. And by including and re-adding the huntsman as a main character, I think it was kind of like it was a time where, okay, we have to do something different. And by including the huntsman, it was very, very close to the original tale told by the Brothers Grimm. As far as argument and message goes, both films did a very good job of depicting that jealous people never win in the end. Here, the most obvious person was the evil queen. She was very jealous of Snow because she was the fairest of the land, and she was next in line to be queen, and she wanted that. She wanted it so bad that she went out of her way to make sure Snow White was destroyed. And I think both Disney and Rupert Sanders wanted to keep that, that taboo subject going, that no matter how jealous you are of someone, in the end, that jealousy will overpower you and you will not win. You will not defeat that person you're jealous of. Just be happy with yourself and maybe you'll have a better outcome. Disney's version in 1937, it kind of instilled that vision that all women cared about were beauty, keeping up a household and finding that perfect mate. Snow White stayed in this Seven Dwarfs home, and it was filthy when she first got there, but she made sure it was clean, tidy, it was perfect. She waited for the prince to come along the entire time, even though we only saw him once or twice, and she made sure she stayed pretty the entire film, which it was pretty perfect with, the timing that the movie came out, because in the early 1930s, women didn't have jobs. Their job was to, keep the household up, take care of the kids, make sure the husband was happy, and make sure they stayed, good looking while doing it. In 2012, this version was more focused on the plot and the story and, telling that, women, they can be pretty. A lot of women are pretty, but they wanted to make sure that women can be pretty and strong. They wanted to show that today's day and age, women don't have to sit at home. They don't have to sit on the crown. They don't have to be royalty. They don't have to, fight for this image of beauty the entire time. It's not all about that. They wanted to make sure that they show that women are different. And I think that goes along with this new feminist movement that's coming out right now, that women want to be heard. They want to be known that we are strong just like men. We want to be treated equally. And I think in 2012, Snow White and the Huntsman did a very, very, very good job of showing that women don't need men, but they are willing to befriend them and keep them in their lives to achieve a common goal. And that goal in Snow White and the Huntsman was to defeat the evil queen. Overall, both films were obviously about Snow White, but with having the Huntsman as a main character, included Snow White in 2012, and then having the Seven Dwarves as, main characters in the 1937 version, these two directors do two very, very good jobs, but two very different, they had two very different approaches of what this story was going to be about. And I think although the main character and the main story and the end all and be all was about Snow White, these are two totally different stories. Snow White and the Huntsman is closer to the original tale of the Brothers Grimm. In 1937, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was a brand new way of imagining what Snow White was about. And I think Walt did a very good job of reimagining and reopening a different lane for this film as the Universal Pictures. But two great films, just two totally different outlooks and two totally different concepts in the end.